Subs, have you ever asked yourself the question, is the person I'm with a dom or a bully? That's what we're going to be answering today on the Midnight Manor. I'll be going over a story in which there was presumption of control, why this is a problem that can cause toxicity in your relationships, as well as some tips of how you can try to identify this in the earlier stages so you're not wasting your time. My name is Midnight. I'm a professional dom who's worked with over 1,000 different clients, and I help people explore the lifestyle and help them find ways that they can evolve so that they can have more success in their lifestyle and relationships. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That's how we make the channel grow, and in this case, bigger is better. Let's get started. So this kind of began when I was reading an article in the subreddit BDSM Advice, where there was a young submissive who was going to be meeting a dom for the first time. This was her first experience in this as well. And everything was going good at first. They were talking a lot online, seemed to be hitting it off. They agreed to meet up at a coffee shop there, and everything's looking good here. They have their communication, they're meeting in a public location, and there's no real heavy expectations. What could go wrong? Apparently everything. She received a message a couple days beforehand from the dom, in which he said, "When you arrive, I expect you to not be wearing any underwear, and there better be a butt plug inserted inside of your ass." What the fuck? That is absolutely not an appropriate starting place for this kind of conversation. It's way too early, and this is what we would call a presumption of control. This is where they're believing that they are entitled to this ahead of time. Now, for our young sub, they weren't sure if this was a red flag or not. They're being dominant, they're asserting themselves, they're showing the ability to control, to take the lead, and they're obviously being very confident about themselves. But is this the right time for that? And I've seen this occur in many different ways. I've seen it done with titles. This one woman was like, "If you don't refer to me as goddess, do not talk to me at all." Didn't matter if it was private, public, dom, sub, everyone had to refer to her as her goddess. She didn't make too many friends. Another common type is with collars. You get started right away, and all of a sudden the dom's just like, "All right, you gotta put on this collar, you're mine now, I'm gonna tell you exactly when and how to wear it, and how this is all gonna work so I can denote to everyone that you are my property, and I now have the ability to control you." All of this is a presumption of control. It violates the basic concepts of people coming together as equals and negotiating a power exchange. And a big reason why you want to avoid this problem is that you're valuing your most precious resource, your time, very cheaply, along with yourself. You want to be able to make sure that you're actually establishing the proper expectations that you should be having when you're meeting someone that you don't really know. So, what are those expectations? Well, it starts with thorough communication. You want to be able to make sure that you are having good, strong foundations of understanding what it is that you're both into, and that you're building value with each other. This is very important that you're seen not as a cheap or disposable toy for someone else to use. You both have to start even, understanding that you're coming from the vanilla perspective of equals. And then you enter into a power exchange relationship, where these are consensual negotiations. It's not like they're the king, you're the peasant, and this is just the baseline. No. This is the baseline. This is where you need to start, and then you go into it from there. That way you don't look at submission or dominance as an entitlement or expectation, but as gifts. Gifts that complement each other. So you start off neutral, you get your power exchange, and then it becomes that each one's giving to each other. There's a flow that occurs with it, and there's an understanding of the value of what you're bringing. If someone doesn't value the gift of submission, do they deserve it? Do they even know what they have? Do they have confidence in themselves? So you really want to try to avoid this position where you're with someone who gives off the idea that they might be a dom, but they're more of a tyrant. They have their expectations of what they want you to do. So how do we look at this? How do we find the solution for how we're going to deal with this without making things overly complicated, where we could be driving away actual potential partners who do care? Well, you want to be able to ask yourself two simple questions before you're going into it. Do you have consent and following up, do you have boundaries? If you have consented to go to a coffee shop, that's all you've consented to. That's it. You're there to talk, to get to know someone as equals. And you should always be understanding that there's always going to be a boundary. You're not just going to walk into something and expect to be able to do everything for someone without any background. So if you know that there are boundaries, you need to be able to have the communication to get to the consent of knowing what it is you're allowed to do at this point. There might be a little bit of wiggle room based off the early energy, but you can't assume more than that, and it should all be negotiated up front. The fact that they're saying, yeah, we're going to meet for coffee, and then shortly beforehand they start to add an extra bit. That wasn't consented to. Things were already negotiated, and there was no real indication that this is exactly where you want things to go. Now, there's no problem with doing something like this as a scene, where if you've, let's just say you've been talking for 6 months, you live in separate cities, and this is the first time you're both going to meet. There's so much excitement and anticipation, where maybe that's something that you do want to do. But you want to be making sure that you're talking about that beforehand. You're understanding that this is gifts, this is something amazing that you're going to be experiencing together. And I will say to Doms, if you're wondering, am I being a tyrant, or how is it that I should be behaving so that I can get to that point of getting the consent? Well, I'm going to say that if you want a simple tip, you have to create an aura of safety. You have to convince the submissive that you are someone that aligns with them. You have similar goals, things are working out, and that they feel comfortable that you see them as a person, not just as a piece of property. And then once they feel safe, they're going to be willing to open up to explore more things. So how can this happen without, say, doing a massive BDSM negotiation contract or the such? Well, there are opportunities for each side to partake in this. And in all honesty, both sides should be doing something along these lines of creating invitation to more, not an assumption of something, but the opportunity. Let's go back to our example. Let's just say that both parties have gone to the coffee shop, things are going well, the vibes are there, the energy, there's a little bit of flirting. Now imagine at this point, she leaned in and said, by the way, I'm not wearing any underwear. All of a sudden, this has now become a gift versus an expectation. It's something that was not expected, but is a pleasurable outcome. And of course, presuming that both parties are mutually enjoying the experience, this has now become an invitation to talk perhaps a little bit more sexual. You've gotten that invitation to come in. Kind of think about it like that old school scenario there. You have Dracula standing at the door with his beloved on the other side, and he's asking permission to be able to come in. And without that permission, he can't do anything. Treat yourself like that. Plus, a little bit of vampire roleplay does seem to go a fair bit of distance. Second little tip there. Now, when you're the Dom, how do you try to be a little bit more inviting without being creepy or presumptive? Well, instead of saying to someone, you better not wear any underwear, you could try talking about a scenario that doesn't directly involve the person that you're with. For example, you could talk about I've always loved to do this thing with Shibari, or this impact thing, or this DS scene. I think it's really interesting, and you describe that. And you can kind of see how they're reacting to it. And they might say something like, yeah, I'm really interested in that, or I'd love to do that sometime. Then you're getting a bit of an invitation to be able to ask more questions, to inquire more, because now you're hitting on a hot topic. Now there's something that you have shared in common. And if you're feeling the vibes are right, simply ask. Say something like, I've actually had an amazing time with you. I've loved discussing X, Y, and Z. And you know what? I'd love to try doing the scene with you sometime. Would you be interested as well? It's as simple as that. You've done the work beforehand. You've been able to get to know each other a little bit more. And you simply ask. That's all you need to do. And you're either going to get a yes or no. And that's going to tell you whether or not this is something that's worthwhile continuing to invest that extra time in towards developing a spicy lifestyle or relationship with the person, or maybe this just isn't a good fit. You want to take the time to find that out. Because if you don't figure it out now, it's just going to lead to toxicity down the road, because you're both going to feel like you've invested time and effort for something that isn't turning out the way that you want. And no one wants that at the end of the day. So to recap, presumption of control is where you are presuming that you are entitled to submission or dominance without consent. And without that consent, you can't tell whether you're violating a boundary. So make sure you are talking about that beforehand, and that if you are interested, throw an invitation out there. See what happens. I've been Midnight. I'll see you next time, and take care.